Oh, hey, it's that lawyer that sits in front of the pink tinsel wall and tells stories about immigration. So today's story is going to be about my client. Let's call him Shmon Shmoonin. And he is someone that failed the character requirements on a visa application for a work visa. So, very interestingly, the nomination. So, for anyone that doesn't know, there's two parts to a work visa. There's a nomination and there's a visa. So, the nomination essentially is what the employer puts up, and they essentially say, we have this position available. We've tried to test the labour market and find someone in Australia, but unfortunately, there's no one here. Um, and we've now found this other candidate and we want to nominate them. This is what we're going to pay them. It's in line with Australian market rates. So we got the nomination approved, and that nomination essentially is valid for a period of 12 months. So almost 12 months go by. I think we were sitting at something like 11 months and 2 weeks, and it is December 21st, something like this. So, December 21st, obviously, everyone in the world, well, everyone in Australian work life or lawland where I was working, was wrapping up and getting ready for Christmas. It is not the period of time where you necessarily want to be dealing with things that are expiring, but if inevitably in immigration land, that is what happens. So, 21st of December, I am driving home or thinking about sort of starting to drive home, and we're following up on this application. So, there has not been any real progress. Well, there's been progress, and then we get this magical letter that essentially says your visa is going to be refused on the basis of character. Not an ideal situation, obviously, especially because the client, um, his only criminal history is drink driving offences. So he's been in Australia for more than 10 years, and progressively over those 10 years, he has received three drink driving offences, or three times where he's been done for drink driving. However, those drink drives got progressively worse. So the idea was that we did prepare submissions in response to this letter that essentially said, look, um, these are all the reasons, this is essentially the circumstances of each offence. This is the rehabilitation that he's undertaken. These are the reasons why he should essentially still be granted a visa. And that is, as lawyers, that is our job. Very similar to the way that you present a defense in a criminal matter, is that you would go through all the mitigating circumstances, all the individual circumstances, and explain why, the outcome should still be a positive one. Mind you, had been living in Australia paying taxes for 10, 12 years, something like this. On the 21st of December, 22nd potentially, I was starting to head home for Christmas. I was living in New South Wales at the time and driving back to Queensland, and I, on a stop, read an email that said, Rachel, I'm in immigration detention, help me. Nothing else, no other things, just help me. You don't want a client in immigration detention 3 days before Christmas. Definitely not an ideal situation. Obviously, my response was not, I'm on holidays, too bad, take care. It was, oh my goodness, we need to deal with this, and why are you in immigration detention? So, again, the offences that he'd been charged with were three drink drivings that got progressively worse over a 10 to 12-year period. And yes, I completely appreciate that that is not good behaviour. I completely appreciate that anyone that drink drives is doing the wrong thing. But in the grand scheme of the character test, that those offences are not the most serious that I've seen. So I called my practice leader over in Perth, had a conversation with him, and we tried to, start figuring things out. So the thing that happened when my client was put in immigration detention 3 days before Christmas, he was his house was raided by Australian Border Force officials. There were 8 police officials that came to his house at 9 o'clock at night and put him in immigration detention. Now, I again completely appreciate what he had done was wrong. He had paid all his fines, done all the things that he needed to do in accordance with any court action that had been taken, and his visa had already been, so earlier that day, about 4 hours before they came to his house, that visa had been refused. So it was very clear that he was either going to be able to appeal or he was no longer going to be able to stay in Australia. So instead of, I guess, any reasonable steps in my mind being taken, this man was put into immigration detention as a result of not meeting the part in the character test which says you are not a danger or threat to the community. Very interesting. So I guess the takeaway from this is all criminal offences, even though they are potentially serious traffic offences, should be taken into account when you are disclosing anything on a visa application. The government do take them very seriously, and the thing that you can do to help yourself in these situations is to show rehabilitation. So if you have things that are progressively worse, if you have repeat offences for the same thing, just like in any court system in Australia, where you show that you have rehabilitated, that you are not at risk of repeating the same action over and over again, you have a higher chance of success at being granted a visa. And hopefully the Border Force officials don't come to your house at 9 o'clock at night with 8 people and raid your house for offences that perhaps don't meet the highest level of seriousness under the character test. So a very interesting matter indeed, and I was super excited to be a part of it. Fun fact, we did map out how much it was going to cost that particular visa applicant to remain in Australia and get out of immigration detention. So keep in mind that for when you are put in immigration detention, you must pay the government back any of that money before you are granted, any of the money that was spent on you being there before you are granted another Australian visa. I think we mapped it at somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 that this person would need to pay back to the Australian government, or in legal fees, with all that sort of combined, prior to being granted an Australian visa. And my client that had been here for 10 to 12 years made the decision to return home. And he will never be in Australia again, despite being a contributing member of society, but for those 3 offences for 10 to 12 years. So really interesting matter. But yeah, key takeaway is be diligent, be honest in your character offences, and if you can, show clear rehabilitation that you're not going to go and do the same thing again. Okay, that's today's lesson. For story time. Bye.